Welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. While we usually talk about property, money and success, the underlying theme is that most people want to become richer. So today we're going to dig deep into the true essence of wealth building, and interestingly, that is consistency. Now, you've probably seen or heard about those online success stories, haven't you? Those narratives that suggest getting rich is simply a matter of getting the right idea at the right time or finding the next property hotspot. Now, while those tales, they can be entertaining, they can be inspiring, they often paint an oversimplified picture of wealth creation. Look, deep down we know the truth is it's not that easy. As the oracle of Obama, Warren Buffett, once said, it's pretty easy to get well-to-do slowly, but it's not easy to get rich quick. So today I'm joined by Mark Creedon, business coach to some of the most successful business people and entrepreneurs in Australia, and we're going to discuss 20 small actions that will make you rich slowly. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
You've probably heard me say that property investment is simple, but it's not easy. And that's not a play on words. Fact is that those who follow a proven framework can develop significant wealth through property, but most investors never get past their first or second property. In other words, most property investors never develop the financial freedom they deserve. And it's much the same for business people and for entrepreneurs. They don't get the success they're looking for either. In fact, it even seems to be harder to become successful and to become rich. And by the way, those two things are not the same. So you can be successful without being rich and vice versa. But it seems to be harder today, despite all the podcasts, despite the blogs, despite the YouTube channels saying getting rich is easy. However, I recently came across a blog from Darius Farrow where he shared 21 simple actions that will make you richer. And I'd like to go through those with Mark Creedon, business coach to some of the most successful business people and entrepreneurs in Australia, and the CEO of the Metropole Property Group. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Michael.
Well, look, despite those success stories you see online, deep down we know it isn't simple to become rich. But as I said in his blog, Darius Farrow suggested that whether you're training for a marathon or working towards financial independence, your best bet is actually to aim for consistency. So I'd like to have a bit of a talk about what consistency is when it comes to wealth, Mark.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic topic, talking about financial consistency. I suppose, Michael, it's really about moderation and perfect execution of a strategy, isn't it?
Well, you actually need to have a strategy, and that's one of his thoughts. Look, it's also developing rich habits and getting rid of poor habits, which we often discuss with our good friend Tom Corley. In my mind, a financially consistent person is dedicated to getting richer little by little. They're not in a hurry, but build it over time. It's about saving, investing and having a plan. So let's look at some of those small financial actions Darius identified. Look, they actually sound obvious, but it's interesting when you speak about them. You'll find that very few people do them. And I was really interested that the number one item on his list was reading books. Interestingly, when Tom Corley did his Rich Habits study, that was number one on his list as well. And Mark, it's actually not reading for entertainment, it's reading for education.
No, and I think there's a big difference between, we know, Michael, we talk about leadership, we know that leaders are readers, but the reality is many wealthy people, and I think it's because books just contain quality information. And the thing about, you can put all sorts of information on the internet, but you've actually got to be careful about what you craft into a book, and I think that's what separates a book from everything else that's out there in lots of ways.
Well, there's so many so-called experts on the internet, on podcasts, on blogs. So reading is important. I guess learning is also important. So reading is a way of learning, isn't it? The most important investment you can make is in yourself and in your education, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah, I think it is. Now,
the next thing on Darius's list was spending time with Well, he said smart people. Now, this again isn't a judge of people, but it is important who you hang around, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, being around, let's talk about smart people, clever people, successful people. I don't think smart necessarily is a sign of education, Michael.
No, good point.
I know lots of highly educated people that aren't successful, and I also know people who have lower levels of education that are amazingly successful. So, but I think being around clever people, successful people, it gives you an idea of how they think and operate, and so as a result, it really inspires you, doesn't it?
Definitely. Well, I know that's one of the benefits of being in a mastermind group. You are in a couple, I'm in a couple, and interestingly, you run Mastermind Business Accelerator, which, in fact, we've just recently come from the Gold Coast where there was the intensive, and while people get benefit from speaking to you as a coach one-on-one, and they get benefit on the Zoom calls, actually being in a room with people is so different, isn't it? There's such a benefit being around those people.
It's just an exponential benefit. They always say they probably learn, Michael, as much from each other as they do from you and I in those couple of days that we spend together at those intensives.
Sure. So it's not just about learning from them, it's gaining inspiration, gaining knowledge, sharing. I think a lot of business people in particular feel isolated, but once you get to a particular level of investing, people feel isolated as well. Their peer group isn't going to get them to the next level. So I guess a question I'd be asking people listening to you and me now is, have you got the right peer group to get you into to the next level, whether it's in property investment or business? And if not, how are you going to change that?
I think, Michael, that's particularly true in Australia because we have this tall poppy syndrome. You're talking about Tom Corley. We spoke with Tom Corley. He never understands what that is about. But we do have that. So the more successful you are, be it in property investing, be it in business, the harder it is, in fact, to find people that you're happy to share your success or your frustrations or your fears and aspirations with.
I think that's a good point. So it's interesting when you do speak to other people, you've got a chance to hear that they've got similar challenges. And also, I think it can ground you. When you think things are going extremely well, I think you've got to realize that sometimes it's not as good as you think. You're not invincible. And if you acknowledge that luck brought you the success, then it actually is going to be helpful. So when you speak to other people and hear a little bit about their challenges, it grounds you.
Yeah, it absolutely does. The other thing about spending time with other people, Michael, is it's not just spending time with them. You've got to learn from them. And I think that was the other thing that Daria said, wasn't it? That there's great value in asking questions.
Being curious. So some people feel the education's finished when they leave school and they don't want to learn more, don't expect to learn more. But we've seen that in business people, we've seen that in investors. They want to find new ways of doing things. They want to get a different perspective on things. So some people have got a learning mindset. They're not scared to ask. But I know even within people we know, some people think if they ask, it's a sign of weakness.
Yeah, they do. They think that I get one of the fallacies of being in leadership or being successful is that you have to have all of the answers. I think it's a quote by Walt Whitman that says something like we should be curious and not judgmental. So I think the whole concept of being curious and asking lots of questions is a great skill to develop if you can.
Yes. Now, in this list of 21 little actions that you should take that, if compounded, make you richer, Darius also suggested, I guess, the concept of delayed gratification. His words were controlling the urge to buy stuff. If you're always after nice new things, his thoughts were, well, you're going to have two results. You'll never be satisfied because there's always another nice shiny toy, but also that you're going to empty your bank account.
Well, I mean, you often say this, Michael. Wealth's not about accumulating material possessions. It's, in fact, that can just lead to a massive amounts of dissatisfaction. Although, having said that, I do think you said that you needed that new iPhone.
It's much nicer turning up to my problems in my Bentley than it was in the Jaguar I had a few years ago as well. Look, we know that any problem money can solve isn't really a problem, but money doesn't solve all sorts of other problems. And I guess this is really going back to the concept of delayed gratification. I listened to one of your great podcasts, by the way. Those who haven't listened to Mark's Mastermind for Business podcast, you can find it on the same podcast app wherever you're listening to this, where you interviewed your grandson, Izzy, and learned lessons from a 9-year-old. And one of the lessons was about delayed gratification, which is a lesson we still should be learning as an adult.
Yeah, Isaiah spoke all about the importance of budgeting, and he also spoke, Michael, about the concept of asking questions and asking why. Needing to know the why behind things.
Wasn't that a painful age when your kids kept asking why, why all the time?
Yeah, it's not too bad when you're a grandparent though, because you just tell them to go and ask their parents.
That's right. As we go through Darius's list, the next one was ignoring fake geniuses. There are many people out there, he said, who are pretending that they're smart, not only on social media but in real life, is what he said. The ability to distinguish the fake from the real will help you avoid stupid things, was his comment.
I think that the pandemic has taught us this, because during COVID, there were millions of epidemiologists suddenly on Facebook or on any of the social media platforms. So they're out there, and we hear it all the time, Michael. You and I often chat about the fact I'll be at a barbecue on the weekend and people will be talking to me about, the cliff that property's about to fall off. I think I've heard that 1,000 times in the last 10 years.
Yes. So be careful who you listen to. Everyone's allowed to have an opinion, but that doesn't mean that they should be giving you advice. And as I've often said, well, opinions are a bit like belly buttons. Everyone's got one, but they're not really very useful. Going through Darius's list, and actually the next one sort of fits in, because he said limit social media consumption. Look, it is a way of just vegging out and getting out, but too much of it can actually turn you into a mindless consumer. And in his words, consumers don't get rich.
Well, I think it can turn you into a mindless consumer. I think it can take a ridiculous amount of time. And it's amazing when I've chatted to people about time management and we look at how much time they spend on social media, if they were to take that time and put it into something productive, like reading or spending time with their kids or grandkids or whatever it might be. But I think the other thing, and this is a point you always make, and that is that what we see on social media is the highlight reel. We never see what's on the cutting room floor. And I think that's another very important reason to limit your time on social media consumption, because it's not real. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not the real world.
No, it's not. And in fact, it's in general people showing off. So again, just understand what it is and what purpose it's got in your life. Now, having said that, I've made some really great connections in the early days of social media. That's in fact where I met Tom Corley, who's become a good friend and an author, where I met Andrew Myrams, who's a good colleague as well. Interestingly, I haven't found it as useful for networking nowadays as it was in the early days.
No, I would agree with that. And again, I guess that what Darius is saying is don't turn off social media, but just be careful about how you utilize it and what time you spend on it.
Okay, his next point was work a bit harder than the rest. Now, it's not just working harder. I don't fully agree. He says this one alone will make you wealthier than your neighbour who only works 40 hours a week and never more. But putting in the extra effort, well, how often do you see as part of Mastermind Business Accelerator people who work harder but just never get there?
Yeah, all the time. I'd probably change that a little bit to work harder and smarter than the rest. So be careful about where you spend your time, because we see lots of people who just work super, super hard. And I think there's a great analogy that you use. It's like running on a treadmill. If you run faster and faster, you can keep running faster, but you still don't get any further. So working harder necessarily on its own is not necessarily the solution.
Sure. Now, there are things called the 5 a.m. club, and people get up earlier and put in more hours, but that doesn't actually mean putting in the hours to physically work. And in fact, I know you get up early and you journal every day. And in my mind, that's productive time as opposed to working more on the tools.
Yeah, that's right. It's not so much the over 40 hours working behind a desk or whatever it might be. It's the extra time planning. As always, Michael, it's where you spend your time, not how much time you spend.
Okay. Next point was be deliberate about your actions. Take an extra moment to think about actions. And if you do that, it avoids stupid decisions. Look, I think I have matured. You've known me for a long, long time, and I'm not as hasty anymore. I actually look for both sides of the story. I usually realize the truth is somewhere in the middle. So I guess his point is don't have knee-jerk reactions.
It's a great lesson. I think that's a great lesson with emails, Michael.
Oh, yes, yes.
Gone are the days when you can sort of, you could write a letter and you could put a stamp on it and leave it on the shelf waiting to get to the post box. Now you can respond to something in a heartbeat. And how many times have I had people contact me going, I've just sent an email and I wish I hadn't.
So sometimes you actually should write it out. It's a great way of getting your thoughts, your feelings out, but don't press send, or at least put it in drafts and wait overnight before you press
put it
send.
in drafts, send it to yourself, read it again, give it some time. I think that's a great deliberate actions. I think is a great hint.
Okay, his next point was enjoy time off to the max. In other words, recharge yourself, and then you're going to be able to get back to working. I know I, in the past, wasn't very good at that. So even during times when we went away, I'd still have my phone on the whole time. I'd still have my computer. I'm much better at it than I am today. So when you're there, be there. So, I take a couple of afternoons off to be with my grandkids, and occasionally you forget and you call me and I don't respond, but I used to.
No. Well, and the thing is, I used to always say to you, don't. Please go spend time with the grandkids. But now I know if I ring and you don't answer in the afternoon, I go, it's a grandkids afternoon. I always like to think of it in these terms. When you're on, you're on. When you're off, you're off. And I think what I see you do now and what I do when I take time off, I still work but I have set time for it. So I know that, you do your emails first thing in the morning or last thing in the afternoon, or you make your phone calls last thing in the afternoon. But the rest of the time, completely resting, relaxing and recharging.
So it's not just about working harder, like he said, but it's also about resting harder and recharging. It is important. And interestingly, one of his other points was that you should actually sleep better as well. You actually should take time to set 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever you need sleep, structure your sleep and your waking time so that it's another way of turning off.
Well, I think there's a couple of things there. Sometimes sleeping on a decision is ideal. It's a little bit like that, being deliberate and taking time to think about things. So sometimes I think that you need to actually sleep on a decision. I mean, sometimes you need to act quickly to take advantage of something. So I think you can sleep on it. But the other thing about sleep is I always say to people, sleep is a wonder drug. It's amazing the restorative power of sleep. Michael, it's why sleep deprivation is used as a form of torture. I mean, we don't think clearly, we don't act clearly. So I think this sort of concept of taking time off, getting rest, and also, Michael, physical fitness as well.
Oh, definitely. That's one part of it. So there are actually, if you think about it, very few things that need an instant response. So sleeping on, especially with regard to investments, especially with regard to setting up your business. Now, there's no doubt that there are some things in our lives that need instant attention, but most things, particularly if you talk about property investment or the big picture of looking after your business, they can wait. And thinking about it, sleeping on it, it's interesting, your subconscious mind will often come up with ideas, thoughts. It's part of how the brain works to actually work out some of your problems, and you wake up with a good idea.
Isn't it funny how many times you do wake up and you go, I've got the solution to that. It's just come to me in overnight. So it's great.
I was listening to a great podcast by Richard Wiseman, who's a professor of psychology, on sleep and how sleep works and how you have different sorts of dreams at different times of the night. And the last one, which happens to be the longest one, is often when your mind works out the problems and you wake up with a solution. Now, one of the other points on Darius's list was welcome feedback. To be honest, it's something I was not good at in the past. But my suggestion is, no matter how great you are, there is always room for improvement. So no matter how successful you are, whether it's in your life, as a family person or in business, there is always room for improvement. But we're so involved in it ourselves that we can't see it. So the point is, welcome feedback.
Yeah, I mean, when you're close to it, you're in the trenches, or you can't see the wood for the trees. What you have to do is be open to it and give people permission. And I know, you challenge me and I challenge you, and it's a good thing because I know if I've got something to challenge you, and you'll often say, yes, please, or I will ask for permission. You'll do the same, and I think it works really well to have someone who can give you that feedback to get you sort of on the right course if you might be deviating a little bit.
Well, in our businesses, we see this all the time. With regard to property investment, we recommend that our clients come and have an annual review to see how their properties are performing. And when we see new clients, we always start off by seeing what their financial position is at the moment. And many of them have invested time, money, effort, emotion in buying properties. And I used to, when I sat down with clients, say, knowing what you know now, would you buy that property again? And you can see them wince. They know they've made a mistake, but they're too subjective about it. So getting independent, sensible advice. They say things like, but it's washing its face. It's actually not costing me anything. What they've forgotten is the opportunity cost, which they can't see, but somebody who's numbers oriented. And that's why we put a strategic plan together and numbers and figures and say, if you stuck to this property, this is where you'd get in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years time. If you sold it, there would be extra costs involved. Capital gains tax, hopefully you made some profit, so stamp duty, buying the next one. But if you take all that into account and get an extra couple of % a year capital growth, this is where you'd be instead, numbers and figures. Similarly, Mark, I see in Mastermind Business Accelerator where you're dealing with business people, they need feedback, they need a coach, they need somebody to see their blind spots.
Well, they do. It's why they're here. I mean, it's why they're sort of in the program, Michael, because we get back to what we were saying before, being successful can be quite lonely. And, sometimes it's hard to reach out to people. You can't share it with your team. Maybe you can't share it with your family. They don't understand it. If they're not in their own business, they really struggle to understand. Now, we spoke about this at the intensive too, that sometimes people don't understand the concept that running a business can be hard work, even though you're not, on the end of a shovel. I think the concept of having that, that independent person, that coach or that mentor that can really challenge you and question your thinking is of great value.
Well, Mark, I actually think this is a really good time for a shameless plug. Tell us what Mastermind Business Accelerator does.
Well, Michael, it's a business coaching program for clients who are in a service business or professional practice that is simply too reliant on them. And so what we talk about is how we can help them to grow their business, to retain their income, but to have the business that is 50% less reliant on them. And we do it by working one-on-one with me, coming along to the intensives. There's lots of group work. They get access to people like you, to Caroline, and to a whole range of experts that we have working with us.
Now, it all started with you being my business coach well over a decade ago, and then being the coach to other directors of Metropole. And so it was so good, we became business partners, and we've referred a lot of our good clients to you as a coach. So they're sharing the same coach we do. So if you're interested, if you're in business or a professional practice, I'll leave a link in the show notes. And why not have a chat with Caroline about how Mastermind Business Accelerator could help you? Now, the problem, Mark, is people will say, you don't understand. My business is different. What would you say to somebody who's thinking that now?
I would say it's not. And I would say that everybody says that to me. One of the fascinating things, Michael, when we get people either in breakout rooms in our Zoom sessions or together at the intensives, and they go and talk to each other, and I say to them, what's the one takeaway you got from that conversation? Almost every time it's, we've all got basically the same problems. We've got basically the same issues. And so it doesn't really change regardless, as long as it's a service business or professional practice, it doesn't really change.
Okay. Back to the list of 21 small actions that, if you repeat them and compound them, will make you richer. Darius Farrow suggested giving is an important part of it. He says when you share your wealth, you get less attached, and when you're less attached, you move freely in your career, and that usually leads to more wealth. Well, I know that you and I both believe in the concept of giving and tithing, and interestingly, in August this year, Metropole's running another charity ball. Pam, my wife's organised a number of them in Melbourne, and this year it's for Hummingbird House in Queensland. Actually, I'll leave a link to it in the show notes, Mark, because if you live in Brisbane or you want to fly in, as I know some people are going to anyway, it's going to be a fun night for those who are there, but it's going to be a great way of raising money for a charity for basically a hospice for terminal kids. So we believe in giving. Now, that's one way of giving, but I think there's more to what Darius was suggesting.
It's interesting that he talks about the fact that if you give, you'll feel less attached to money. And I think that's one way. But the other way I look at it is that if you give, I mean, in some ways it kind of feeds into karma. It makes you feel better about who you are and what you do. And the better you feel about yourself, the more likely you are to go out and to be able to, further what it is that you're doing. And so you become more successful. So we're probably saying one and the same thing. I think it's just a slightly different way of getting there. But there's a certain great feeling in knowing that you're giving back to the community, making a contribution.
Well, I believe it's important when you reach, well, I was going to say the top, but when you become more wealthy, it's your obligation to help other people up the rungs. And that's what we do with our podcasts, our blogs, the YouTube videos. Sure, we're in business and we hope to get some business from it. But I also very excited when I actually got an interesting email from somebody in Taiwan only a couple of nights ago, out of the blue, got my book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits, and he made some great comments about how it improved his life and changed his life. Now, after the royalties that I get when it's exchanged from Taiwan, I've probably got 50 cents from it. I don't know. But having said that, that made me feel really good that I gave some information and helped other people.
Well, you've impacted somebody's life. And Michael, can we do a quick shameless plug? I know you said you'd leave the list, but Saturday, the 26th of August, at the Hotel Grand Chancellor in Brisbane for the Metropole Masquerade Charity Ball in aid of Hummingbird House. So 26th of August.
Thank you.
Lock it into your calendar.
That's great. Now, next point is be okay with being alone. Something I wasn't as good with in the past, but I'm much better with. Maybe COVID's helped me learn about that when I didn't have a lot of choice. But use the time for learning, for thinking, for writing, for improving, for working. There are things you do alone, so be comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think that being comfortable with being alone, it probably enables more focus and productivity. So I know you spoke before about, my morning routine. I like getting up in the morning. I like spending that time on my own. I remember there was a time when my wife, Caroline, would decided that she'd get up early as well. She'd come and sit on the balcony with me while I was journaling. And I had to try and find a way to say, look, I actually don't want you here without offending. But there's great value in solitary time to think, to plan, to strategize.
As I work through Darius's list, another one was improve your skills, keep improving. The better you are at what you do, the more rewards you're going to get. I think we've already covered this in a number of different ways because you have to keep changing. Look how the world's changing. Artificial intelligence is a significant change that's going to affect all our lives in many, many ways. So keep looking for ways to improve, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you get left behind. I mean, and Michael, I think also that's what a growth mindset is about. Is that if you have got a growth mindset, you continually strive to be better at what you do, and to do that, you have to learn new skills.
Okay, now aiming high is another suggestion of one of the things that you should do to become richer. He suggested that aiming low and aiming high requires the same amount of mental energy. So why wouldn't you aim high? Now, I'm not sure that that's actually a correct fact either, but I'm just repeating what he said because it takes you out of your comfort zone to aim high. So your mind actually keeps you in its safety zone, but all the good stuff's outside your comfort zone, Mark.
Yeah, I think that what he's saying is there that in principle or in theory, it's the same amount of energy, but it's actually more energy. But I guess it comes down to whether you can look at that additional energy as a drain or a challenge. So if you look at it, stepping outside your comfort zone as being a real drain, you're probably not going to do it. But if instead you look at it as a challenge and something that you're going to strive to, then you probably will.
Now, some people are going to be a bit cautious about that. One of the things that we discuss at Wealth Retreat is some people have got that underlying thought, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve it, shouldn't be wealthy, it's not right. But in my mind, the highest form of wealth is your ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want to do today. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. that's priceless. It's the highest dividend money can buy. So therefore, you're not doing it just for the money. You're doing it to appreciate life. And only before we pressed record, we talked about this isn't a dress rehearsal. Only we brought that up because two people we know very well in the last couple of weeks have been diagnosed with cancer. 3 weeks ago, neither of them knew they had this. So enjoy it and don't be embarrassed to aim high, to build wealth, and to appreciate your life with people that are important to you.
No, I love that great quote, and we've heard it a couple of times from Jackson Malam. We heard it the other day, which is, his father told him that you've got two lives and your second one starts the moment you realise you only have one.
Isn't that interesting? That's right. Now, another point that Darius made was one that you'd already mentioned, and that was sticking to your diet. So in other words, diet and exercise are important. I've heard people say your body's a shrine. Well, mine isn't exactly, and this is one of my weaknesses in some ways. But it's another form of discipline, another form of delayed gratification.
Yeah, look, I think this is a tough one because I think we need to be careful about that. I mean, the reality is, if we're talking about self-control and delayed gratification, that's certainly going to help you to get rich. If you're talking about sneaking the odd chocolate bar or being a bit lazy with your diet or having that extra glass of wine or something, I'm not sure that that's going to stop you from becoming rich.
No, but he's saying you should enjoy your life that way. Clearly, with a lot of these things we're talking about, they're much harder in practice than they are in theory. But the idea is not necessarily to do all of them, but to have a list of things, and we'll leave a list in the show note of the bullet points that you should say, hey, which of these can I change? Which of these can I do to improve my chances of moving forward? There's clearly no guarantees, but I think if you follow the footsteps of others who've done that, and that's the theory behind the Rich Habits, Poor Habits book that we've written as well. It's the theory behind what we talk about in property. There are frameworks where if others have done it and achieved the ability to be in that top 1% of investors who own 6 or more properties, why wouldn't you do what they do? Much the same with Mastermind Business Accelerator, where there are frameworks and patterns that other business people have done. Just do the same as them.
Yep, follow the bouncing ball and it will work for you. But having said that, I just want to make sure that you're okay. I mean, it's okay to have a sneaky chocolate every now and then.
Okay, thank you for giving me permission. Now, as we get to the last couple of points on Darius Farrow's list, it was celebrate other people's success. He says never be envious of other people, be inspired what they do, because your time will come. Don't compare, I'm suggesting now, your chapter 30 with my chapter 70, where I've been around the block a few times, made more than my share of mistakes, and now built a significant property portfolio. But as you said, in Australia, there's this concept of tall poppy syndrome, lopping off the heads of people who stick them up above the crowd.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I do actually like about our mastermind tribe, Michael, is that people just, they do celebrate each other's success. They share, and it's a safe place to share that success. I mean, everyone's time comes at a different pace, doesn't it? I think recognize that, focus on your own journey, get rid of the trying to keep up with the Joneses, get rid of trying to being jealous of somebody else's success. I remember a good friend of mine a number of years ago bought himself a sports car, and he rang me and he said, I've bought this sports car. And I went, good on you, mate. That's amazing. I know you've always wanted that. And he got a bit teary and he said to me, of all my friends, you're the only person who said that. Everybody else said to me, oh, midlife crisis, or, oh, you think you're special in a sports car. And it's just amazing instead of celebrating the success, they wanted to find ways to put it down.
Well, it's interesting when Pam got her first Bentley and she was telling some people at the golf club that she's getting a Bentley. One of the ladies said, oh, don't bring your Bentley here. People won't like you. And can I tell you, it spoiled the fun of driving her car there for a while, and she still remembers that.
Yeah. Didn't stop her getting another Bentley, though.
No, it didn't. So celebrate other people's success. Don't be envious, because if they've managed to do it, there's no reason why you shouldn't. Now, interestingly, the next point he made is another one of the things. There's actually quite a crossover with the things on Tom Corley's list of what rich people do in his 5-year rich habit study, and Darius has listed, but it's not surprising. And the point he made was buy quality things. Cheap things lead to cheap results. Focus on quality. Tom Corley said if you're going to buy something, buy the best quality because it's going to last.
Yeah. I think investing in quality over quantity leads to better results in the long run.
Yep.
And Michael, that's not just physical possessions, but investments, relationships, experience.
Good point.
Also, I think advice.
Oh, yes. The most expensive advice you can get is free advice that is wrong. So invest in good advice. I like
Absolutely.
that one. And the last point on his list of 21 items was invest in money-making equipment. To earn money, we need to work, he said, and to work we need tools. The tools you need to do your jobs are not expenses but investments. Now, if your job involves tools, then yes, buy the best power tools you can. But for a lot of people listening to this, their tools are inside their head. It's the information they have, the team they build around them, their attitude. So invest in yourself, invest in your future, in my mind, because you're going to be living there for a long time.
Well, one hopes so. And like investing in the people around you. So I think we could use a very broad definition of tools. So it might actually be physical tools, but it might be people, it might be advice, it might be, it might be equipment that you're using. You and I invest in to record these podcasts. We invest in good quality equipment. I hate, Michael, there's this podcast that I've listened to a few times. The content is amazing, but I just can't get beyond about 10 or 15 minutes because the quality of the recording is so horrendous that it just overshadows how good the content is.
Isn't that a shame? Well, there we go. We've actually gone through a list. Now, some of these you may not see a direct relationship between the suggestions and becoming rich, but becoming rich, becoming wealthy, and rich and wealthy and success are different words and actually have different meanings. So becoming rich, in my mind, isn't a goal you should achieve. Becoming wealthy and enjoying your life and appreciating your life is a goal I think you should strive for. And that involves having the right energy, making smart choices, knowing what to do, but also knowing what not to do. And I guess the concept of this is the more well-rounded a person you are, Mark, the higher your odds of becoming wealthy.
I think that's exactly right. And as we look through each of these points, Michael, it is about just, taking bits and pieces of them and helping them to contribute to that all-rounded approach.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Mark. And if people want to hear more about your thoughts on business, so if you're in business or professional practice, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and I'll leave a link in the show notes also, go to Mark's Mastermind for Business podcast, and it's actually a little bit shorter, but it's out every week, and you've got some great guests, and I'm going to have fun listening to you in a different way.
Yeah, thank you, mate. I'm thoroughly enjoying it.
Okay, catch up with again real soon, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
The mindset message I'd like to share with you today is that the moment is not permanent. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, why do babies love playing peekaboo? Well, apart from the obvious fun, especially for adults, and I know that as a grandfather, it's because up till about the age of 5 months, babies haven't yet developed what they call object permanence. Object permanence is our knowledge that objects continue to exist even when they can't be seen, heard, touched, smelled, or sensed. That's what psychologists tell us. Now, while this is a vital survival mechanism, it also means that as adults, we've got a tendency to think that it'll take us longer than expected to recover from an unpleasant event. These events have got power over us because we continue to relive them in our memories, trying to make sense of the trauma, trying to make sense of the confusion. It's this tendency to think that things are permanent that causes us to get stuck. Today blends into tomorrow, and whether you felt that your day was good or bad, it's unimportant because your thoughts are limited by the possibilities that arise from that one thing, the thing that went wrong. But things can change in an instant. What's happening now won't go on forever. A chapter in your life is not the whole story. When you let go of the anxiety about your future and the depression about your past, you'll feel the only thing that's available to you is the present moment, and what you make of it. So don't treat a bad day like it's been a bad year, because this date, the date you're listening to this message, will never come again. Each breath you take is a precious gift that somebody else is fighting for. There are people on this planet who would love to be in your position, in your location, have the life that you've got. So rather than remember those bad memories, think about what you're grateful for right now, because you'll never become wealthy unless you have an attitude of gratitude. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?